So, hello everyone, my name is Therese and Bonilla, and I am here today to report about the Japanese literature, specifically The Grave of Fireflies and the Haiku, The Old Pond. However, unfortunately, my um, group mate, Judalyn Lanata, wouldn't be able to join our Zoom meeting. So, what we will be doing is I will be discussing the Grave of Old Fireflies, and she will be discussing the Old Pond. Okay. So the plot analysis begins with the firebombing of Kobe in the World War II. Before this, Seita and Setsuko live happily with their mother. Their father is away in the Navy. Their brother and sister flee from the air raid, and Seita reassures his little sister when she worries about their mother. The mother is seriously injured and later dies. Seita is distraught when he is given his mother's ring. Setsuko wants to see her mother despite her brother's efforts to distract her. They are sent to live with an aunt. Seita had kept a tin of fruit drops, and these are a very persistent image throughout the film. And he also didn't tell the aunt that the mother died but had done so because he hadn't wanted to worry his sister. The aunt constantly dropped hints about Seita working and attending school, despite the fact that both places were bombed. She is resentful about the two children eating the food and later convinces Seita to sell the mother's kimonos so they can buy rice. Seita and Setsuko went to the beach and they went swimming, imagining a happy scene when they see their mother again. When the aunt sold the kimonos, they had rice at last, but their aunt is still resentful since they don't work hard for their food. They are reduced to eating rice porridge, which is why Setsuko is always hungry. Seita resolves to get the money out of their mother's bank account. So they buy things such as a stove, and the aunt is still resentful at this, thinking that they did it to spite her. Seita makes some fruit drop water using a sweet can, and they decide to live in the air raid shelter. Seita asks for food and straw from a farmer, and they find wood and food in the forests. They went away from their aunt's house. Setsuko watches fireflies and buries them all when they died as they use it for light. She reveals to her brother that she knew about their mother's death. When Seita goes to trade again with the farmer, he discovers that there is nothing left to trade, and they are told to go back to their aunt. Setsuko becomes ill and her brother encourages her to eat, and they are both plagued with lice and very, very hungry. Seita steals crops such as sugar and potatoes to feed his sister when she is sick. When she is taken to the doctor is unhelpful. Seita and Setsuko think about food, but later they then discover that the Japanese fleet has been sunk and their father is dead. Seita then buys food such as chicken and watermelon for his sister, but then he discovers that Setsuko has been eating marbles due to hallucination. Setsuko wants Seita to eat rice balls made of mud, and then she later dies when Seita was feeding her watermelon, but she couldn't have she wasn't able to eat the watermelon anymore due to being hungry. So there is a tragic difference between the darkness and misery of Setsuko and Seita's existence, while those who were returning proclaimed that it hadn't changed at all. There was a scene at the end of the film that showed a family going back to their home, and they seemed to be very happy. They seemed to be very happy that their home is still intact and that they are back at their homes. But in Seita and Setsuko's part, they weren't able to really go back to their homes because there isn't any home at all. And Seita mentioned that in the some parts of the film, that how can they go back to their home when they don't have any home at all. So the audience is then shown a montage of images of Setsuko in happier times, such as when she's on the swing. Setsuko is cremated and Seita puts her ashes in the candy tin, which is later discovered by the janitor. When Seita dies of starvation, and he and Setsuko reunited. So what I did for my report is I used the guided questions as a basis for what I am going to be reporting today. So this film is often regarded as an anti-war film, but that's an inaccurate generalization. We don't witness any battles or soldiers marching into the front lines of combat. Actually, the enemy flies above, but they're not characterized in a villainous manner. war is a mere backdrop in the survival account. And the central theme here is how war temporarily changes who we are. So as you can see, it didn't really talk about the history itself of the war or how the war happened, but it focused on the aftermath of the war, how the war affected people who are not privileged and those people who are actually privileged. So what I did is I highlighted the word of the central theme, and the central theme is evident right from the opening shots, and these are from the opening shots. We see bystanders regard Sata's death with no empathy whatsoever. They actually hated him for being hungry or for being poor, and they actually hated him for being dead. They feel like it was their responsibility that he was dead. So then we witness the gradual surge of selflessness in the people of a bombed village. Then it starts with their aunt. At first she's welcoming and caring. Soon enough she is ripping them off and cursing them. She constantly mocks and humiliates Seta. Eventually she's depriving them for food, hiding and saving the food for her own family. And of course, since Seta is the son of a general in the navy, there is some of like a pride still intact with him that the only option they have is to leave their aunt's house. Then this is really like a really good point that I was able to get from the film. Like the transformational effect of a war is also manifested in the scenes where Seta seeks the help of a doctor. When he stands above the body of his bleeding mother, the doctor delivers the bad news, showing genuine sadness in their inability to help. In a much more later scene that I discussed a while ago, Seta seeks the help of a doctor to save his mother from dying. But the news is delivered in a very cold, like that is inevitable and that he didn't really care that much. So Seta is then reduced to a thief at one point, but the viewer forgives him because we have experienced the harsh realities of the war's aftermath. It makes me think of how many times people have looked down at poor people stealing bread when we have no clue what has led them to arrive to such last resorts. In this scene, Seta was begging the farmer, to let him just go off once because he really needs to provide food for his sister. But the farmer didn't actually let him and didn't really listen to his pleas or his reasons, although the farmer is very capable of providing, food for himself and food for others as well. So there is only hope for humanity in the story exists in the innocence and kindness of their relationship. Children are uncorrupted by the ugly world we live in. The purity of their innocence is what makes the nature of evil incomprehensible to their minds. The older we get, the less innocent we become. We're built that way to endure the harsh realities of life. And I was also able to point out this one specific scene. In this scene, I was able to point out the relationship of fireflies to the bombing. On the first picture, you can see Seita and Satsuko very afraid of the war that is currently happening to them. But in the next picture, on the lower right of the screen, you can see that Seita was having fun as if the war or the bombing helped him find light or um find the light that he badly needed on those days, because in this part he was trying to go to his aunt's house to get the things that they need in order for them to sell and have food for for their own, and like to have food for Seta and him. And this is like the relationship of fireflies that was able to see and pinpoint in the movie, and how like and how we Seta find like hope in amidst of all the things that are currently happening. Like there is actually hope in war, and that is what the scene made me feel. And it is a really great movie, and I wish that everyone would actually see it. So that goes my report. Thank you so much for listening. Next one will be reported by Judilyn Lanato.
One of the example of haiku is the Old Pan. The Old Pan is one of the best-known Japanese haiku of all time. This haiku consists of 3 phrases that contain the syllable count of 575. Matsubasho, the writer of the Old Pan, the poet of this haiku, was a famous poet of the Edo period in Japan. Edo period started in the year of 1603 to 1868. Tokugawa Ieyasu was the powerful man in Japan after Hideyoshi had died in 1598. Edo period is also called Tokugawa. Matsubasho, recognized as the greatest master of the haiku or hokku. In the Old Pan, also known as the Asian Pan, Basho plays with the sound of the frog leaping in the Old Pan and imaginary of the Asian place. In traditional Japanese, the haiku reads, Poro ikaya kawasu tubikomo mesu no otu. In the English translation, the Old Pan, the frog jumps in, the sound of the water. There are only 3 image scenes in the poem. The first one is a static image of an old pan, the second is dynamic image of the frog jump into the pan, and the last is auditory image that represents the sound that is generated from a frog jump into the pan. Water. To begin with, the pan is the poem is an old water body. It seems people have either abandoned the pan or it's there for a long time. Thereafter, the frog that jumps in the pan presents 2 things, the season and the reason for jumping. Lastly, the water sounds create a resonance in the reader's minds. These sounds have some deeper meaning that discussed in the latter part of the analysis. In the first phrases, Puru means old and Iki means band. Here, Ya is keiriji or cutting word. Thereafter, in the second phrases, Kawasu means frog and tubikomo means jumping into. In the last phrases, Misu means water and Oton stand for sound. Here, no is ponomy or anon. For literary devices, there are some important literary devices in the haiku poem. Firstly, the pan is a metaphor for the subconscious mind. It can also be a metaphorical reference to the soul, whereas the old pan seems to be example of personification. Here, Basho personifies the pan. Thereafter, in the second phrases, the frog acts as the metaphor. Here, it embodies an external stimulus that inside the human mind to think. Lastly, the water sound contain an onomatopoeia. The poet used the sound to portray an image. Moreover, there is also metonymy in this phrase. Here the poet presents the effects to refer to the cause. Analysis for the line 1. The haiku using Pomiko's Saisho translation begin with the image of the old pan. It can be somewhere in the forest or far from the human habitation. Basho associates no other sound with this image, so the pan is probably at the distance in the tranquility and silence. Moreover, it is old. Being an ancient creature, it has survived the ravage of time. Burdened with the experience of the long year, the pan exists as a sage. The poet somehow connects himself with this pan. The poet is about in the identity and characteristic of a human. There is a closeness in their nature. Both are silent and at peace. The old pan seems to be symbol of subconscious mind. It's there inside everyone, like old pan, exists in silence. Moreover, the poem refers to the subconscious mind of an old person. Here, the old man is undoubtedly the poet himself. And for the line 2, suddenly a frog breaks the tranquility of the plant. It doesn't start to croak in its usual pattern. The frog simply jumps in the pan. Why does the frog jump into the pan? One has to ask this question first before to the climax of the haiku. The frog might have jumped into the pan not for breeding or laying egg, as it's not the season of monsoon. So one thing is clear that the frog does it for the biological instinct. It seems as if the water of the pond rejuvenates the frog. So it jumps into the pond naturally without biological urge or chemical upsurge inside its body. The old band is not about the culture, society, or group of people. It's about the experience of a person or a people. Like the Prague, persons also need solance to give time to his mind and soul. Thus, the Prague jump into the water can be symbolic reference to meditation. And for the last line, in the last line of the haiku, the sounds become an interesting part of the imagery. The sound is not artificial. An external stimulus is responsible for the creation of sound. When the frog jumps into the water, it generates a short, staying sound. It is not shrill, yet it's not deep. The texture of the sound lies somewhere in the middle. The poet's mind gets alert after hearing the song, but doesn't break his concentration. Rather, it's heighten his trance and take him to the next level. One can think about it differently. While cooking a very special dish, one has to use every material in a specific amount. If anything goes beyond in a certain concentration, the dish doesn't taste good. The opposite is also true. Here in this haiku, the sound of the water is that special ingredient that must be used in the sound amount. Thus, it can be heightened the level of the poet meditation.